Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I'm getting this episode up a little late, but, them's the breaks. Sunday night was dinner with neighbors, and that's usually when I sit down to record, and Monday was a super long work day down at FDA headquarters in Maryland, and by the time I got home in the evening, all I wanted to do was my PT exercises to keep my back and hamstring from walloping me this morning. Now, the best part of the FDA visit was when I checked in at security and gave them my driver's license, which I'd only realized maybe half an hour earlier had expired at the end of January, about 2 weeks ago. I was a little more cheerful than usual, trying to be all upbeat, giving the guy my license, hoping he wouldn't look too closely at it, but he held on to it a few seconds longer than usual, and I knew the jig was up. I was scrawling my name on the visitor badge, and he said, I can't use this. It's expired. Most people, they'd play dumb. They'd pretend they don't know. Oh my God, how could that have happened? I, on the other hand, am incapable of telling a lie and said, yeah, you got me. I just realized that a few minutes ago. Kind of hoping you'd let it slide. He couldn't, and I didn't have any other government-issued ID on me, so the FDA person who was our escort for the meeting had to come down from her office, talk to the head of security, and vouch for me. The thing was, she had done this for me once before, a few months ago, when I left my ID in my car back in New Jersey, so I actually told the guard, you may as well get the phone number ready for the security head so my escort can call when she gets down here. And he acted all sheepish, like I was mad at him or something, but I was like, dude, it's my screw up, not yours. I'm glad you're this diligent. Don't, I'm not going to pull rank or try and be an asshole here. I'm just hoping to get into the meeting. Anyway, they got me in. We had our meetings. I managed to catch an earlier train home, which is a blessing in my world. And here we are with only moderate back and leg pain from nearly 8 hours of car and train travel and 2 hours of sitting in conference rooms. But that is all prep for next week's trip. One of my member companies is flying me and my wife to Japan, so we've got 14 hours of flight time ahead of us each way. I'll tell you more about that in next week's episode, which I'm hoping to get up right before the trip. But right now, let's get rolling with this week's guest. Now, this time around, my guest is Dmitry Samarov, who joins the four-timer club of Virtual Memories podcast guests, along with Mimi Pond and Liz Hand. Peter Cooper is on his way there if he manages to put out another book in the next couple of months, which I wouldn't put past him. But Dmitry has a brand new book out. It's a memoir called Soviet Stamps. It's about his family's emigration from the Soviet Union to the U.S. in the 70s and how Dmitry became an artist. The Soviet Stamps uses vignettes, artwork, family photos to, well, as his description goes from the book itself, to chart his emigration from the USSR in 78 and his attempts to fit into American society and his peripatetic attempts to earn a living while continuing to create artwork. It's a really good, really strong piece of writing. It's a very clear-eyed look back at the life that Dmitry had to cobble together from the fragments of circumstance, basically. He's a child when his parents made the decision to come to the U.S. He gets here at 7 years old, doesn't speak a word of English, starts in Boston. He ends up living in Chicago, which we also get into. But it's that idea of telling the story about, again, building that life and finding himself as an artist without any of the recriminations towards one's family that certain podcast guests might have. I'm saying too much, but Dmitry really is honest about some of the embarrassments of his own childhood behavior, regardless of his outsider status as a Soviet immigrant in 70s and 80s Boston. And he also includes some of his artwork from that era, which we get into in terms of the embarrassment factor of looking back at stuff you made when you were an adolescent. But the book's also reflective on those larger events, the things that were out of his control, but helped lead him along the path that he's chosen in his life. Now, Dmitry self-published Soviet Stamps, as we'll get into in our conversation. So if you're interested in reading it, and I really recommend this book. It's good. It's small, not some 500-page gigantor, but it's a really engaging piece of writing about what it means to grow up in that particular milieu, in that deracinated world, and to find, again, oneself in making art. So yeah, he self-published. You need to visit his site, DmitrySamarov.com, to order it from him or find the bookstores that carry his work. Now, there's a link to his website in the show notes, and I'll spell out the URL at the end of this episode. Unfortunately, you can't just do a search for Soviet stamps and find it through Google, because there are a lot of other things that come up when you look for that. Now, as caveats go, not a ton. We recorded in the library of the Society of Illustrators on East 63rd Street in Manhattan. Thank you very much, Society. So there's a little New York City traffic noise, but not much else. Now, here's Dmitry's bio. Dmitry Samarov paints and writes in Chicago, Illinois. He's the author of 4 published books, Hack and Where To, both illustrated memoirs of his taxi driving days, and Music to My Eyes, and now Soviet Stamps. And now, the 2020 Virtual Memories conversation with Dmitry Samarov. So when it comes to faking it as an artist, how have you done it all these years?
I'm bound to be found out.
That's been my take all these years, that, they'll figure out I'm a fraud. But ultimately, I realized nobody wants to catch the fraud because they're afraid their fraud will be caught next. So
actually, I mean, I hear about that a lot. I've never had that.
Yeah.
That fraud, the
imposter syndrome thing.
Are we okay? Do you need to check anything?
No, this is all going.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, this has been with me my whole life. It's just what I do. It's what I am. It's how I interact. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't imagine life without it. Yeah. I mean, the writing stuff came later, but,
Yeah, tell me about Soviet Stamps and where it began initially and the incarnation it's in now.
Yeah, so it was basically finished more or less about 5 years ago, at which point I tried to find the usual, paths to publication, like find an agent, find a publisher, and send it many places, and got either silence or rejections, and did that for, over a year, I think. I kept trying to place it someplace, and I got very close once, down to like getting a boilerplate book contract, and then it dissipated. The money disappeared. Poof. Yeah. So it's the mysterious inner workings of the book industry. But so then, maybe after about a couple of years of it, it being like somewhere near the top of my mind, I just put it away sort of there was a bunch of other book proposals, other big book ideas that didn't come together until when sometime in the spring of 2018, this guy named Jerry Brennan bit on my idea of a music book, which was one of the many ideas floating around. So I very quickly put together this book called Music to My Eyes, which came out last spring. And through the process of making that book, which was the first book that I actually kind of made soup to nuts myself, like I designed it. I found the printer, found the format, everything, aside from some, edits of the text, I did everything on it. But through that process, I realized that, it edged me closer and closer to self-publishing, which was a thing I was avoiding. But having all that creative control and at the same time understanding that what I wanted to do was obviously not, I didn't have people beating down the door for it, from
where is Dmitry's memoir?
Commercial entities, I just decided sometime, when did I decide this? Well, after the publication of Music to My Eyes, but probably sometime in the summer, pretty late, I decided, well, I have this other book and it's just eating at me and it's just sitting there. And since I know how to make a book now, more or less, I'll just make it and get it out of my system, get it out there and just see what happens. And there it is.
You happy with the physical edition of it?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah,
it's not bad. Yeah, it's a weird thing because it's really my third book, but it came out fourth.
Yeah.
I'm most glad that it's done.
What prompted you to start the book initially?
So yeah, what the book covers basically in a nutshell is from when I was 7 till I was about 27, which covered the years where me and my family moved from the Soviet Union and kind of got settled in the Boston area, and the different ways I got pushed into doing art or pushed myself into doing art up through art school. I guess these were things. There was things in that story that I was hoping to figure out how to write about all these years since I started making books. So yeah, for anybody that's not familiar at all with my work, the first 2 books I published were about being a cab driver. Covered my 12 years as a cab driver, and that opened the door for me into writing books. So then I had to come up with other things to write books because that seems to be a thing I want to be part of my life and seems to be an active part of my life. So I guess the childhood immigration memoir, kind of how I became an artist, was like a no-brainer, like a natural. But I also, it was sort of a challenge. I'm not the type of writer or the type of person really, I guess, to kind of bare my soul, reveal like dirty secrets. I wanted to write a book with, my biography as the subject with some distance. So it had to be something that happened a while ago. And so I'll be turning 50 this year. So looking back, 15, 20 years, 30 years, it seemed like a more doable thing than writing about something more recent,
When you talk about the shame factor and all that, what about putting your youthful art in the book itself, having reproductions of some of your childhood and teenage work? Was there any cringiness behind that?
It was funny to revisit it. It's sort of that part, and so much of my writing is sort of prompted by the visual, by pictures and stuff, and looking at all that art prompted the memories and subjects that made up the kind of, I don't know, I mean, they're sort of interlocking essays that make up the book, and it's mostly chronological, but things double back and repeat. But yeah, all this artwork that I've always made, it's the one constant, really. But looking at it is like looking at somebody else's work. It's very strange.
Yeah.
And I reproduced my 4th grade autobiography in there, which bizarrely predicts that I'd be an artist and writer, which was a big surprise when I first reread it. a few years ago. Yeah. The
how
writer
much-
part, yeah.
How much revision did you do when you returned to the book this time around? Did you tweak anything?
Yeah, there was a bunch of cuts, and there's things moved around just in terms of order. I had 3 different editors look through the book, and each one had interesting and different suggestions for it. One of the last things I edited or added was just a few pages that pulled the story almost up to the time I started driving a cab in Chicago, which was like about 30 or something. But this one editor, she wanted more of my like adult life than I had. I'd first, I think, cut it off. I cut it off at 22 or 23, right when I moved back to Boston and first started driving a cab. But she encouraged me to write more because it would include more of my kind of like artist life. So that was the stuff from age 23 to 27 was probably some of the newest written. I actually wrote it last year. Yeah.
Did it feel of a piece with the other writing, or was it similar to looking back at your old art and seeing a different writer's hand?
You mean
the newer material?
Well, it was. I think putting the book away for so long, which was I think almost 3-4 years. It actually, when I dove back into it, I think I was able to make it better. And the distance let me see it with fresh eyes. I mean, it's the same reason why you need editors for books, is because in the process of writing a book, you're so invested in the material, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, besides the distance, do you feel you've changed over those 3 or 4 years in a way that either makes other things from your past more vivid or illuminates, certain patterns or behavior that you didn't see when you were first writing it?
I think it's incremental. I mean, it's like anything. Yeah, I think the writing has gotten better because I've just done so much more writing. I mean, aside from the books, I, up until recently, regularly wrote reviews of various kinds of book, movie, theater, and that it's kind of like going to the gym. You just keep exercising those muscles. And I think it gets better as it goes. I mean, the last guy that read the book before it went to press kind of like described it as a kind of cubism, this book. But
yeah. So?
Because of things repeating and doubling back.
That sense of multiple aspects.
Yeah. Repeating and but adding some shading, Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that stuff is still because I'm not like truly like a educated, trained kind of writer. It's still instinctive, but I'm sure a lot of it comes from whatever reading influences I have, which are many,
Speaking of, what do you feel the book most benefited from, I guess, in those terms? I think of our mutual pal, or the guy you introduced me to, Boris Fishman, and his Soviet migration story, which formed a very different memoir than this one.
Yeah. I mean, I read, when I first was writing the book, so I probably started writing the book in, I don't know, 2013, 2014 or something like that. Probably like around the time you and I first met. I was probably already starting on it because we met for the second cab book. Yeah. So I'm sure I was working on it already by then. But I tried to read as many, especially Soviet memoirs, but all kinds of memoirs for if for nothing else than what not to do, what not to repeat, I don't know if I'd be able to judge what makes mine different than Boris's, for instance. I know they're very different, but we're also very different people.
Yeah. And yours isn't about eating.
No.
Yeah.
No recipes in this book.
Or much religion. That's, that also plays a role in Savage Feast.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas you've got video games in the 1980s, which I was pretty thankful for.
Yeah.
Spy Hunter, which
Spy Hunter plays a big role.
Yeah.
Did you play?
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, I used to worry that there was a recording angel who, upon my death was going to tell me how many quarters and how much time I'd blown at video games. In my adult years, I'm assuming it's the same thing, but with porn. But, in my youth, that's where I was really concerned. But
yeah. I don't know that I'd be the person to say how this book is specifically, say, Soviet Jewish. There's definitely, it's what I am. So, yeah. But yeah, there's a mix of stuff in this book. But it's a lot of it is of adjusting to, like a life in a brand new to me culture. Mm-hmm. That's for sure what it's about. How it's specifically Soviet Jewish. There is one huge biographical difference between me and Boris is that he came about a decade later.
Right.
Yeah. At which point, Soviet Jewish immigration was a flood, whereas when I came in the late 70s, it was a trickle,
And I think one of the recurring themes throughout the book is the dream selves or the ghost selves of Dmitry. If my parents had done this, if we had gone here, if we had done that.
Yeah.
Do you contemplate those much? The potential Dmitrys, if they had stayed in Russia, if they'd gone to Israel, if they'd pushed you into another field. Well, if you'd gone to a conservative shul instead of reform,
right.
Things like that.
I don't know that I did prior to working on this book, but that it forced those kinds of thoughts for sure. Yeah. Like for instance, there was a time where my father was offered a job in the San Diego area, so we could have moved to San Diego sometime like in the early 80s probably. That would have been a very different experience. But yeah, all any of us has is the one that we had. It also gave me a chance writing this book to sort of really think about the experience of my parents and what they had to go through to adjust to a place, right at the beginning of their careers. They were 30, 31 when they came here, and my mother especially, like she had to give up her career. She'd been a gynecologist back in the Soviet Union, and she had no English. She had 2 little kids, and the degrees are not recognized here. So she had to start over. And it's sort of mind-blowing to me, looking back, like as a 40-something, to what they did and what kind of chance they took, just into like a leap into the unknown.
Do you feel like it's something you couldn't do or something you wouldn't do because of selfishness? That's generally my,
Well, selfishness is definitely a big part of it. I mean, the one big, sort of, I don't know if it's point of contention, but like huge difference of experience between me and my parents really is my childlessness, and my pretty much complete devotion to kind of art and writing, to the exclusion of everything else. It's like a mode of life that they just don't. They're very supportive, but I don't think they really understand. Yeah.
But you've got siblings who've given them grandchildren, so.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
For some reason, I thought your brother had had kids.
No.
Oh, geez.
2 younger brothers, no kids.
Yeah, I thought the middle brother had.
No.
Geez, maybe you do need to get on that then.
No,
I got off the hook because my brother took
the middle brother has a summer home in Maine.
Yeah, which is close to a kid.
That's a child. It's a project that they have. And then the younger one who just got married a year ago and is about to turn 31, I don't know. They still have a healthy window. Yeah, they're my parents' last hope.
Yeah.
No, it ain't happening for me. Yeah. So that's, yeah. It continues to be an interesting, ongoing conversation between them and I.
But they, you'd say supportive?
Very supportive. Stupidly supportive. And, the fact that, like they read that book and didn't disown me, that was very nice of them. They could have reacted worse, because I have some not so nice things to say about my father, especially.
Yeah. But you portray yourself in relatively, not one-downmanship way, but, you don't put yourself out there as a paragon of
No.
virtuous behavior.
No, I was a pain in the ass kid, I stole, I didn't care about school, I wasn't a good kid. I wouldn't say. It's funny, the one, my mom's one big comment after reading it was why I didn't write more about my middle brother, Boris. But there was reasons.
That's his book. He can write that.
Yeah. So. Well, that's the other thing is that, for all the times that I wondered or worried about, like, what either family or friends' reactions might be, like, I realized from writing it, the way I write it or my view of the world is so my own that, like, they can have their own version. It shouldn't, and I think they would understand. I think most of them do understand. You
do have the one anecdote that, it turns out is it's a false memory on your part or a false memory on your mother's part.
Yeah.
Did you run things by them?
I did. Well, yeah, I sort of, informally interviewed them a bunch of times, because, I wanted to test some of the memories because as we know, memories are notoriously faulty.
Or, given the Soviet immigrant thing, we could say cover stories too, but whatever.
Yeah.
Memories is fine.
Yeah, could all be a deep fake. Right. But, right. The story that you're referring to is the story of the missing pedals from my bike. So I had this bike that I loved in the Soviet Union, and somewhere in the middle of immigration, I decided that I just couldn't live without it. And I made my parents call my grandparents back in Moscow and have them ship this thing to us. And it arrived in one piece, except that it was missing the pedals. And this to me in my memory was like some perfect metaphor for something, like the whole process of immigration and how, like, what you hold on to and what there's pieces missing, blah, blah, blah. Well, and in my memory, I forgot about the bike pretty much instantly, and it lay forgotten in our basement somewhere in Brookline, Massachusetts. But according to my mother, it had turned out that I happily rode it in America for a couple of years until a neighbor of theirs or a friend ran over it. And so what do you do with that? Like the two versions,
I feel like there's a deep family secret tied in there somewhere, but we'll just stick with those two, and that's fine.
Yeah,
a repressed memory thing. It's okay, but
right, yeah. And yeah, so which one is true? Which one is more valid? There's obviously some sort of value in making up this version of the story that I made up. I needed it to mean a certain thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Something brought over from the old country, that I was clinging to, and then it was incomplete. Yeah.
Well, that beats the Superman myth, where the only thing that can kill him are the remnants of his old planet.
Right.
When he comes to America, and kryptonite is the one thing that can remind him of who he used to be and kill him. So all things considered, you came out ahead on that one.
Yeah. I'm not complaining about it.
So tell me about the notion that art is estrangement. That sense that it's something you write about in the book, that the disengagement from the world is necessary for your art making. And potentially, well, tell me whether you think it's your art making or art making.
Yeah, I don't know if I could make a global statement like that just because of the fact that I don't know how. I mean, I don't think anybody knows how somebody else goes about their work, really, as you can't really see inside of another person, no matter how well you think you know them. But in my case, the only way to make art is to have some distance, to be a little bit withdrawn at least, because you can't see what you're looking at if you're in the middle of it, if you're part of it. And you can't be completely disengaged, really, but being a fly on the wall to me has always seemed like a more effective strategy. like it helps me to sort of like look and listen. It's the way I've gathered so much of the things I've written about. First in the cabs, I mean now in the bars. So I'm a part-time bartender, and I'm doing the same thing, which is being part of an environment, but not really participating firsthand, really. I mean, so, I walk by people and hear snatches of conversation all the time, and that stuff stays with me, and it's gonna end up somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know that an artist can actually simultaneously be in the middle of their life and be making art. I don't know. Maybe you need more talent, more multitasking artists than me, or better social skills.
I was going to say it might explain the no kids thing or something, but
Yeah, but yeah, I need all my private time selfishly to work out all this stuff. So yeah, there's no room for the little ones.
And how's the writing changed for you? The act of writing. I mean, you talk about the reps and getting better as you've done more.
Yeah.
What do you feel you're better at?
Are
there things that you look, I could not have written X, 3 years ago, or I couldn't have put it in this frame.
I mean, I try not to look back too much. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in the case of this Soviet Stamps, it's sort of looking back because it was a project that was on the back burner that got thrust onto the front burner just very recently. And there's parts looking at parts that I wrote, to loop back to a thing you asked earlier, like what changed during the process of all those years. Like some of the writing in there, like real, I could see a way where I'd rewrite the whole thing,
Sure.
But you can't.
No, because then by the time you finish,
if you start pulling that thread, then you never finish, and you become.
Welcome to my life.
Well, look, if you're, I mean, there's different kinds of writers and artists. For some of them, it's just all process, and they're fine just picking at a thing forever. I know writers, that published one thing like 20 years ago, mm-hmm. and they've been working on something else on and off, and they're content to do that. I guess I think the whole thing is one project, but it's good to have isolate pieces that are, cast aside so you can move on. Mm-hmm. In this case, books. Yeah. It's too much to carry with you. Mm-hmm. All of it,
Now, it does remind me of the conversation I had with Edie Nadelhaft about 2 or 3 months ago about having to go into her studio and have turned all of her paintings upside down so that she can walk up and, that's what's wrong.
She was the one that did the motorcycle paintings. Yeah.
Which raises the question of when do you know something's done in art or in writing?
It's very, very instinctive, but for me, it's when I start adding things and then taking them out, mm-hmm. like the same things, you'll start seeing a pattern, where you're taking a thing out and then you put it back in and then you look back at an earlier draft and you've done it again, Yeah, it's, I think I'm better at walking away from things than I used to be in a way,
And paintings also?
Paintings also, yeah. The paintings have gotten, especially, in the last year or two, they're not all one-shot paintings, but they're closer and closer to the direct experiences, and less and less futzing, mm-hmm. less and less futzing.
You mean single session of work?
Yeah. I can do it depending on the medium. Mm-hmm. Oil paintings is more complicated, but I don't do as many oil paintings as I used to. But so most of the stuff I work with is water-based on paper, gouache or watercolor or sumi ink. And those I found, going back into, I have no patience anymore to revise in a way that I used to be able to.
Yeah.
I'd rather just do another thing or throw it. If it really sucks, just to throw it away. That's fine too, you know?
Was there a moment of demarcation where you reached that point where it was, you know what, I don't need to, I can throw this away and just start again or do something else?
You get a sense when something's going way wrong. I mean, with some mediums more than others, like with ink or watercolor, once you've wrecked something,
things are unsalvageable.
Because it's additive. There's no subtraction. Mm-hmm. Like some of the other mediums are a lot more forgiving. Like with the gouache, I love gouache because you can paint layers and layers. You can glop more and more onto it. You can start over and over, you know, and correct as on the go. Whereas, with ink or watercolor, once it's mud, it's mud. It's over.
Yeah. It'll
tell you, you know. But not being precious and not holding on to, like, you know, you got 1/10 of a thing that's working and the rest of it's a disaster, you know, and just holding on to it. I don't need to do it, and I generate enough stuff. I rarely have what an artist or writer's block. I just keep throwing things against the wall, you know, and I have to assume that some percentage of it will stick. The rest will just die, you know, and that's part of the process. Yeah.
And how do you measure the life or death thing? I mean, it's not sales, it's not money.
No, it has to live its own life out in the world somehow, find some sort of audience, you know. So even though, like, it's interesting with the books, I've had this bizarre, like, backwards career with publishing where I started sort of like probably at the pinnacle for my writing career.
For your sort of,
for my kind of writing. So I published with the University of Chicago Press. You know, it was like this crazy 2-year process during which I kind of learned how to put together a book because they're so fanatical about all these details, and it's a university press. So there's a lot of lag time. There's a lot of committees, approvals that have to happen. Yeah. So it's this 2-year process to then, you know, publishing with an indie, which, you know, on the face of it, you know, I had, you know, 2 book tours, you know, that they sort of helped organize, but otherwise was neither profitable nor, like, people still don't know that there's a second cab book. A lot of people don't, you know. To then being without any kind of publisher or agent or anybody, being left to my own devices, till finding this guy, Jerry at Tortoise, to sort of partner with me on my 3rd book, to self-publishing. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I mean, it brings it back to a scale and a level that I understand from doing art. I mean, to me, these books, because of my sort of creative involvement with them, are almost like prints with words, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing I can understand, whereas sending it off to some place to have machinations, happen, either for reviewing, for like all these intricacies of the publishing world, which are kept a mystery from writers for the most part. There are very few mysteries left for me in this process. Like, I know where to send it to make the thing, you know, like I know the program to make the layout, and there's a satisfaction in that, a different kind of satisfaction than I had with the other books. So it's just a satisfaction of doing the best I could for that project, and it finding whatever limited audience it can. And the people that find these books, these last 2 books, seem to like them, you know, the ones that do read them.
Now, my pal Ian wrote me, I sent him the spare copy you had sent me, and he was like,
good.
I love this even more than Music to
Really?
My Eyes. He just wrote while I was having lunch, because I told him we were getting together and send over any questions, and he's
cool.
reading it right now.
It's very hard to, the
feedback is tough.
The book racket is in huge flux, as all these businesses, entertainment, whatever.
No, they're being disrupted, please.
Disrupted, right. So I guess I'm one of the disruptors, since I've seized the means of production, you know, but it's interesting. I haven't done any events for this book yet. I will in the next week. I have my first 2 sort of public things, because I expect, so it's out a little bit ahead of schedule because the printer got done a month early.
Which is something you learn from self-publishing. You know, things
all these
don't
little,
fit the
all
exact
these little
schedule
things. And, but so we'll see what kind of quote unquote public reaction it gets. I don't know if I can get it reviewed anywhere. And after really trying with the music book, the previous book, and having very few results, I don't know if I care to try. It's sort of an ongoing experiment to see, like, if a thing can actually find its own audience on its own, more or less.
Well, you're looking at this, you know,
yes.
It's the same thing. I do no marketing.
And, you know, I made a special, like, you know, we made special plans to meet because you and I have a good relationship and a rapport, and I value what you do. And this is, you know, maybe the only formal, like, sort of like publicity type thing that happens for this book. And I'd be okay with that, really. But yeah, as far as, sort of greater, like, what satisfaction I get out of reaction to my work, if people like it, that's great. I'm going to do it anyways. Yeah. I've realized that's the thing, is I'm going to do it anyways. And, whatever means it takes for me to keep going, like in the past year, like lowering my art prices way down. Like I sold a bunch of art for very cheap last year, and it felt good. Like it felt right, you know, like instead of waiting for some institution to come along and say that it's worth X amount of money in the future. It may be, but I don't. Meanwhile, I have a house full of art that's just sitting there. I'd rather it go out into the world and find some sort of home, you know? And I feel that way with a book. I could have sat on this book another 5 years, I guess, you know, until some publisher wanted to publish it. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know.
Well, we'll all soon be speaking Russian here anyway. So
I know. I've been making that joke since 2016, where, you know, people should be nice to me because, you know, I'll be the manager at the satellite parking for Putin's 550th limo that America will become, you know, and I'll be their manager. So it behooves them to be nice to me so I can teach them some Russian words. Yeah.
Teaching art. You talk about the uselessness of your arts education, or at least the impossibility of teaching art itself. Right. Yeah. The idea, I mean, but an arts curriculum? Not my original idea. A lot of people probably would agree that you can't actually make somebody an artist. Right. You can teach people some technique. You can teach them history. You can point them at the things that were good, but you're either an artist or you're not. You can train, I mean, you can train a monkey to make a representational painting at this point, probably. But they won't generate their own. Yeah, it's like the AI thing with, oh, look, it made this amazing art. I'm like, because you told it to. If it just was left to its own devices, it would probably plot to kill us all. I mean, it would come up with other things. But if you could design an arts curriculum without having to do any of the administrative work, because I know that's not your thing. Yeah. You know, is there I mean, for specifically for artwork, for painting, you got to go back to the apprentice system. I don't see any better way. You go and clean some other guys' brushes and stretch their canvases for a couple of years and watch what they do. And, you know, eventually they'll let you fill in the backgrounds, you know? Yeah, it's a thing you learn by doing, you know? I don't know how else you do it, really. And by experience. It's weird, like when I get invited, I have a couple of former classmates from art school who are now art professors, and I get invited to do slide talks for, you know, art and writing or whatever. And, you know, they want like a recipe for like, how do you do this? And there just isn't one. And if they take my example, they drop out of school, you know? Yeah. And sometimes I say that, you know, because if you get into the whole higher education situation in America, which is just a horrendous Ponzi scheme, but it's generations of kids in debt. It's horrible, and mostly for directionless. Like some of the stuff I write about being in art school with children of very wealthy people who are, you know, they park them there
the same that you park like a high school kid in a reform school or like an alternative school to get out whatever rebellion they have. And then once that's out, they go into the family business or do something sensible, you know? But I mean, I guess I knew I was never going to do anything sensible. So that's why it's a question mark whether that experience was valuable in any way. I mean, I met a couple of interesting people, and networking, they always say, is a big chunk of college is who you meet.
Yeah, that was John Cuneo was the first guy I ran into with that, the illustrator, who said his great regret was not going to art school, partly for the the connections and networking he would have been able to make. He also thinks he would have developed better techniques, but I think he works just fine.
Yeah, I had a strange art school experience, which I write about in Soviet Stamps, where I was basically married. I had a home life. I had a live-in girlfriend. I didn't go to a single Art Institute party. I didn't drink that much. We had dinner. We went to the movies because she was in film school. We were really into movies. But we were like an old married couple. I'd go to school and I'd come home and paint more, and then we'd go have dinner or eat dinner at home. It was like a real staid kind of conservative like way of life. It's the opposite of what you think of as art school. It's not like they weren't some kind of wild and crazy years. Not for me, But without that stability, I don't know if I would have stayed there. I don't know if, I would have wanted to.
And would it have mattered?
Yeah. But that's like,
Again,
where you play these sort of like
your ghost selves.
Like the ghost selves, they're, what somebody referred to a while ago, counterfactual, if Hitler had won, kind of thing. Although, presently it's not so counterfactual, but, I can't get too far out there. I guess that's why I have no feeling for kind of like speculative sci-fi kind of fantasy world, Do you
think of writing fiction at this point?
I actually am writing fiction at this point so one of the many, many ongoing projects that kind of has taken over now that this Soviet book is out is my bartender book, which I've also been working on in bits and pieces for a long time, but I've realized that in order to tell it, to stuff all my experiences that I want stuffed in there, I have to fictionalize things and move the timeline a bit to have plausible deniability. And
is it also a matter of trying to imagine the lives of some of the patrons after they?
It's actually not. It's not imagining any of the lives. I need. I want some of the experiences. I need to sort of combine a couple of places for it to be manageable. So it's not just a completely endless, sprawling mess. It's more like a technical thing, and that's been really. I'm still. I don't know how far into it I am really, but that's a totally new experience to have. It's kind of like this ventriloquism where I can put words coming out of a different person's mouth, which I've never done before. I haven't written a piece of fiction since I was a kid.
Is there a sense of giving yourself permission to do that?
I'm still feeling my way through it.
Yeah.
It's strange, and it may be the only time I do it. I don't know, but and there, even more than the previous books I've done, it's like this problem of like some sort of like structure or skeleton where a book has to have especially a novel has to have a beginning and an end.
Not if you read Bukowski.
Right. Yeah. If you can withhold a couple of names and then just stop typing.
Just fall into people's lives and fall back out.
Yeah.
Or what I do with you guys. I dip into people's lives for an hour and I vanish.
Yeah, right. So you get like, in a sense, you could think of virtual memories as this sprawling, gigantic.
Yeah. In this way, again, you're one of the few, counter examples of it. For the most part, none of them get to know too much about me, so that way they don't realize how shallow I really am. But,
Yeah, but this is your sort of like kind of defensive line about yourself.
My disingenuous thing. Yeah, I actually used it last night when I was
just to the audience out there. It's a fascinating individual you should all meet.
Yeah, so I was telling another pal who I knew her for a couple of years before we recorded and explained to her that, no, we've actually done one of these. Chances are we're never going to actually speak again because you're going to figure out that I don't have an awful lot going on.
That was an interesting thing when, I think the last time we saw each other, when was it?
We didn't record, but we
didn't record,
for the Frick, I think.
Yeah, we went to the Frick and we had a long walk. And then in some show after that, you talked, I think in the introduction, about your worry that with the former guests that you'd become friends with, you wouldn't be able to have as good a recording for various reasons. And I thought about that a lot, like why that would be if that's true with everybody.
Sometimes it's just that you learn to speak shorthand with the other person, and the third party who's listening to this doesn't know the shorthand or doesn't get the depth of things that are conveyed, when two people are silent, frankly. So yeah,
true.
But I overthink every goddamn thing, as you know. So.
But the fiction making thing is it's sort of new to me after like a lifetime of reading them. To sort of be dipping my toe into it has been instructive. I mean, it's still, whatever I end up with, it's still going to be one of my books where there's going to be a lot of art. I can't imagine making a book without pictures in it. It's the way I think, and it helps me along, and it's a way to. I mean, the Music to My Eyes was entirely prompted by art. It's a book of 160 sketches done from life while listening to music, and most of the writing in it was done looking at these sketches and kind of what the sketches suggested or reminded me of. And really, that's a lot of the way I write, always,
Besides fiction, either within visual or written art, are there modes or genres you still want to get to or you feel you're not ready for? I don't know if that carries over into painting or drawing or anything else, if there's ways of doing this that you haven't explored yet, that you know are out there.
I'm not sure if I could not maybe one specific thing. I mean, there's things that I don't think I'll ever do. On the other hand, like I don't think I'll ever write a poem. I'd really like. That's something I'd like to understand better. Like poetry, it's just been like a lifelong mystery to me. How it works, and how, it's such a rarefied and such a limited form, sort of
compressed,
so compressed, so circumscribed, and it's sort of a wonder, But I don't think I'll ever do it. For art, I'd love to illustrate a children's book. I don't think I could write one. I don't think I have. That's another, almost like poetry, the precision of the language. There's so few words in a good children's book, and I don't know that I could put myself that far back into that mindset. Even, writing about my childhood self, I was very, very aware that there was no way I was going to inhabit that.
No, it's still present day, or at least contemporary-ish. Dmitry writing those.
And like putting a sample of writing from fourth grade, my autobiography was like to illustrate like the huge gap, between the adult self and the child self,
But for somebody who'd only learned English a year or so before that, that's
when I had written that fourth grade autobiography, I'd had like a year and a half of English, so not so bad for that. And I'm actually going to be reading that out loud in a couple of days to an audience, which I've done before. I've actually performed that, the fourth grade autobiography in a comedy show. So that one's a holdover from before, and it got a pretty good reaction. But so I think that's why it makes me comfortable that I can sort of pull it off as a live reading situation.
Do you like performance?
No, I do not. And blessedly, with the music book, I avoided public readings completely. I would get friends of mine to perform concerts and then just sell books and publicity stops for that book. So I never read any of that book out loud. I think overall, because of my great respect for performers of various kinds and realizing that I'm not one, and the very strange and often awkward experience of a book reading, which with rare exceptions is kind of painful, and it's not a pain of kind of self-consciousness. It's just a realization that it's not a thing that I enjoy or I'm good at, or that I'm cognizant of while I'm writing. Like, I don't think most books are written to be read aloud.
See, that varies. A lot of writers tell me that their whole thing is to stop and read it out loud after, to know how it flows off the tongue.
I know that as a technique. I remember that's the thing I learned actually writing the first cab book. That was an editor's suggestion to read out loud.
Now, sometimes that devolves into everything having the cadence of a comedy monologue, which is not necessarily good writing.
That's the problem. Yeah. I think that works. That thing it's a useful technique for writing, for the process. I still don't think it means that in most writers' conception, they think that their readers will be listening to their words out loud. Yeah. It's a very different thing.
A double reading, 20-something years ago at the 92nd Street Y, which is in that direction. And it was Karofis and Boyle, maybe mispronouncing his name, and William Gass. And Boyle was very much doing a stand-up comedy monologue of his short story. And William Gass is essentially like poetry. I mean, you're just hearing this mellifluous flow of words, and it's just you're bathing in the language itself, even though there's no payoff and narrative punchline at the end of it all. There are two, again, very, very different writers in terms of literary fiction and.
No, I've a lot of respect for people that can perform, whether music or poetry or just prose, but it's not what I think of as the ideal.
Does opening night of a gallery exhibition make you more nervous?
No, I hate those because of the schmoozing.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. Is that more uncomfortable for you than performing written word?
Depends. I've had a whole range of bad experiences in both.
Great.
Yeah, in my ideal world, I would never go to an art opening of mine. Actually, of most other people's either. It's not a good place to look at art. It's the worst place to look at art. An art opening is not. An art opening is a social event, But with this weird added awkwardness of a thing for sale, So there's that pressure, and the pressure of people to say nice things to you, whether they mean it or not, which I have no interest in. I don't need sort of empty praise, to keep going. The best thing to do as an artist is to eavesdrop when they don't know you're the artist. So I've had many shows in bars and coffee shops, and sometimes we'd hear very honest comment on artwork that I happen to have made. And I'm never insulted, but I know it's for real. Because it's just a gut reaction, and they have no pressure of reckoning with the person that made it. And that's similarly in a live reading situation, that there's the awkwardness of an audience that has to react one way or another, rather than being in the contemplative state that reading puts you in, where you can, there's so many different things. I'm sure there are scientists that study, the brain while reading or what have you. There's so many things that are going on during that have nothing to do with the situation of a performance and an instant reaction to it,
Artists you've discovered in the last couple of years? Who you look at and, wow, either, this is influencing me now, or, oh God, I wish I had seen this 20 years ago?
It's funny. It's less and less, in terms of visual art. It's less and less. I like, I'll go to the museum now and then. I like to visit old favorites or, exhibitions, but not too many new discoveries as far as visual art. It's pretty rare that I come across something that's new, that interests me. And
not necessarily that the artist is new, but just simply somebody you didn't know about.
New to me, yeah. It's a thing that I rarely find that I need. Just, as far as whatever nourishment, like finding new stuff that way. But other medium, like I watch movies all the time. I love the movies. I'm continually interested, and there's so much that I don't know from, world cinema of various kinds, and books, of course. I picked up random. So I fill in at a couple of bookstores in Chicago, and it's a used and new bookstores, but primarily used. So there's this great thing of random things coming in, and a few months ago we got in The Names by Don DeLillo, and it was a nice hardcover edition. It was a first edition, I guess. It wasn't very expensive, and it was a book I knew nothing about, and I just bought it on the spur of the moment, and I'm about 3/4 the way, more than 3/4 of the way through it, and it's a pretty marvelous book. Yeah. Just on like I haven't read DeLillo very much since I became a writer, or I could call myself a writer. Yeah. And reading him after the experience of trying to, write sentences myself, you just have to marvel. Like, they're just incredibly beautiful. Like, is like a master of the English language, Like, it's sort of, I think sometimes, at least reading this book, his subject is just language, like half the time I don't even know what the hell he's talking about, but I love reading. Like
the William Gass thing. You just can kind of float in.
Yeah. And he does it, at least in this book. It was written in the early 80s, there's no like $10 words, not too many, it's just the way that they're juxtaposed, it just flows, So that I guess discovering writers as a writer is a kind of a different thing. It would be an interesting experiment to go back to read writers that I think of as ones that I loved from the past. Now, I don't know. Like, I haven't read a Cormac McCarthy book in a long time. I used to love those. I don't know if I would now. Maybe. Who knows?
I did watch No Country for Old Men again last night.
Oh, so yeah?
That was but
that's it's a good movie made like from his worst book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the only one I've read of his. I started Blood Meridian, but didn't have time to keep going. And All the Pretty Horses I read back in grad school and didn't know what the hell I was reading back then. So, which is all part of the great spreadsheet that contains every book I've finished since 1989, which is still the going back and seeing the stuff I once upon a time praised is always scary.
Yeah, there's been a few that I've gone back to over the years, like William Gaddis's J.R., which I've read twice. Yeah. I still think is maybe, one of the greatest sort of satire / portraits of American capitalism ever.
I told you that I spoke to Gaddis once, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and J.R. is his favorite of the four.
Yeah. But as far as when you, as a writer, to sort of like try to tease out what the hell he's doing in that book. So the whole book is, it's 600-700 pages of just speech, but it's not a play.
Yeah.
But you learn people's voices just by the way they talk.
Right.
And it's just like a staggering performance, like. And for whatever reason, that one spoke to me, whereas, like, I still, haven't gotten through, Gravity's Rainbow, haven't gotten through Ulysses, like.
I should do Gaddis's first one, which is all about the art world and forgery.
Read that one twice, too, The Recognitions. Good. Yeah, I read pretty much all of Gaddis. I haven't gotten through all the letters. I have the big, thick volume of letters.
And did you read Fire the Bastards? the book about the reviews of the recognition?
No.
There's this guy who's a pen name. I forget what it was, but Jack Green, I think, was the name that he used. He wrote a book about all the reviews of the recognitions and showed how none of these critics had actually read the book or finished the book, or the things they were criticizing were, actual bullshit. Yeah, it was pretty entertaining.
Which, loops back to like publicity and like the great, one of the great, values of your podcast is that you're somebody that actually has read the books of their guests.
Yeah.
Which most of them
never
have
fails
not.
to boggle their mind. You actually,
I know.
the whole thing. You cited something from
and
my
look,
book?
as a book, or maybe former or recovering book reviewer, I know that a lot of my fellow reviewers don't finish the books that they're writing. Yeah. If not off flap copy, off like
the press kit.
Or a couple of chapters here or there, which is like incredibly, rude. It's just gross. It's such a dereliction of duty. I don't know. I maybe I have some old fashioned ideas about certain things, and I still have to go review plays, and I will sit through the last miserable minute of a play. I have to, because that's what I'm getting paid for. And even though you're not getting paid, you obviously take this.
There's actual dog-eared pages all the way up to the end. I made little notes in your
and it's very evident from these conversations, which I listen to all of them. I don't know if how many,
which always makes me nervous. But
why does it make you nervous?
Oh, just because I always assume nobody's actually listening to anything that I do. Because
assuming that nobody listens, I think is actually a healthy strategy. The same as like for a writer or artist.
At the same time, egotistically, I hope that every episode blows through the roof and gets tons of listeners.
Yeah.
The great thing is the paradox of the episodes that I think are going to blow up because of the celebrity nature of the guests that go absolutely nowhere.
Well, that's the thing about it is that's the big these publicists and this whole marketing machine is they still don't know. Yeah. They don't know what's going to hit and then what's not going to hit. I don't know. I've done events which were heavily publicized and nobody showed up at, and other ones with none that were packed. And you can't suss it out. You can't really,
I'm convinced people listen to the David M. Carr podcast about theology and catastrophe in the Old Testament, thinking it was David Carr from the New York Times. But, for some reason that one blew through the roof. I was like, okay. I didn't.
And you can tell they listen through, which is, you probably you realize it's the wrong guy pretty quickly.
You
would
think. Maybe they figured Carr he faked his death and took on a different life or something. But,
So
But making work without the need for that immediate affirmation, I guess, or that immediate reward, I guess, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, you have to have some other, and I've been very fortunate to have some sort of undying inner need to keep expressing myself in the face of fairly universal indifference, and it just does not discourage me. Maybe that's probably some sort of insanity, but
unlike most deluded artists that I know, you don't go around griping about the injustice of it all.
Yeah.
And, someday my genius will be recognized. I know you internalize that, as we all do, but it's not the,
you have to, the bitterness will consume you and rule your whole life if you let it. Of course, I have my moments, but I try to, blow off steam and then just move on. I've had, I totally firebombed whatever bridge I had at the Chicago Tribune as a book reviewer because the last thing that they assigned me was a graphic novel that by the end of it I realized I had once been almost hired to write.
Or draw.
Draw in.
Oh, I don't know if it was
to
right
create.
Okay.
This lady who was an agent for the guy whose life story it was approached me and we had a meeting. And didn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then this thing appeared, and I was, as fate would have it, assigned to write it. a review of it. So before the review was published, I vented about it in my newsletter that, like you with the podcast, I figure nobody reads. Well, one of the people that did read it was the editor of the Chicago Tribune who assigned it to me. And she, had steam coming out of her ears. She was very unhappy with me for.
Well, the upside is they all get fired again and again. So
the upside is, they barely review books anymore. And the book reviews that they get, nobody reads. So, but they did pay pretty well for the, so I sort of miss that. I don't miss working with her at all. So it probably had to be out there in the open. It had, to air that grievance. And I have my bad moments. But I also, I'm very aware that I'm running my own race. I can't do it like the successful people or the writers or artists. I don't want to be doing their work and I couldn't, and they can't be doing mine. So whatever worldly success I'm owed or not owed, it's going to happen or it won't. And I'm just going to keep doing this. It's good in the book realm. I've now figured out, basically, down to, within a couple of $100, what it costs me to produce one of these books if I do all the work myself. I have enough editor friends that will do the edits on the text, either in exchange for artwork or for very minimal sums, So it's really not that expensive to make a book that's a decent looking if you do all the work. That's what I've discovered, which is a pretty happy discovery for me,
I'll leave you to it. I'll try and get people to buy Soviet stamps, and we'll go look at some art.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
And that was Dmitry Samarov. His new memoir is Soviet Stamps, and it's a joy to read. It's self-published, so you can get it through his website, store.dmitrysamarov.com. That site's also got a link to the various bookstores that carry Dmitry's books, both online and brick-and-mortar locations. His previous books are Hack, Where To, and Music to My Eyes, which you can also find there and at better bookstores. You can find more of Dmitry's work at his website, which is dmitrysamarov.com. It's linked in the episode and show notes, but here it is if you want to go type it in right now. DmitrySamarov.com. No www, just Dmitry Samarov. Now, after we wrapped, I asked Dmitry, so, who you been reading? Now, he's been on the show often enough to know the question was coming, so he was somewhat prepared. And if you want to hear his answer to it and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I promise I'll get the fourth quarter 2019 episode up soon. Things have just been pretty busy. You can check out the third quarter episode if you're a supporter of the show, and that features an hour of book recommendations and fun conversation with Carl Stevens, Emily Nussbaum, Kate Maruyama, Laniers, Christopher Brown, Caleb Crane, David Shields, Dawn Raffle, Amor Tolles, Simon Doonan, Simon Critchley, and Sylvia Nickerson. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, a patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this episode at the Society of Illustrators in New York City while I was arranging for Tom Spurgeon's New York Memorial. That was about $35 for parking, $12 at the GW, $5.50 for the subway round trip for my favorite garage on 96th Street. Oh, and coffee over at Birch around the corner from the Society. Now, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think this show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.